stream, please, Victoria.
Asking now. We're now live, Chair.
Oh, that was quick. Right, thanks everybody, and welcome to tonight's internal panel. Due to government guidance on social distances and the COVID-19 virus, the meeting will be streamed live and recorded for later publication on the Council's website. I have apologies from Councillor Rudkin, substitute Councillor Phillips, is that correct?
Yes, Chair.
Okay. Also, apologies for Councillor Graham, substitute Councillor Brown.
Correct, Chair.
Okay. Minutes, item number 3, to confirm the minutes of the continuation meeting held on the 17th of December and the extraordinary meeting also held on the 17th of December 2020, attached
Chair, before we
page
go
5.
further, some participants' cameras were on. They seem to have gone off now. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, the procedure is that you try and keep your cameras off until you wish to speak, and then put them on and then speak afterwards. Is that right? Right, page number 5 of your minutes to confirm the minutes. Are they all right? Is there anybody got any objections to them?
There's a couple of hands up, Chair.
Councillor Pomfret.
Oh, sorry, that's a mistake. I'll take it down.
Yeah. Councillor Evans.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Could I ask, obviously the minutes which are presented on page 5 on the 17th of December, this was a continuation meeting from the meeting held on the 12th of November. I just wanted to know, when were the minutes of the 12th of November agreed, because they're not within this agenda?
Oh, I never noticed
that. That may be my fault. I'm really sorry about that. Let me just check. I think it's because they were meant to go out with the last meeting. I'm really sorry about that, guys. Okay. Do you want me to send you all a copy for you to review before the next meeting as well?
If you will, Victoria, there's a genuine mistake been made, and I think it could be clarified quite easily. Everybody all right with
that? Well, I'm okay with that, Chair. Obviously, the 2 minutes will need to be agreed at the next meeting.
In that case, if there's no dissent, we'll take them at the next meeting then. And we'll have three meetings then to agree at the next one. Is that all right with everybody? Can't see any dissent?
Yes, Chair.
Fine by me, Chair.
Okay, can't see any dissent. So, declarations of interest or party? Any declarations that we haven't been notified from? Nope. Public consultation. I understand there's nobody wishes to speak. Is that right, Victoria?
That's correct. I haven't had any requests.
Okay. That takes us on to number 6, empty properties, Nuneaton, Bedworth. Report of the private sector housing manager. Is it Paul or Ravi? Which one's going to deal with this one? Page 16.
Chair, we're both here. Ravi will be doing the presenting, and she's new in post, so I'm here for support.
That's very kind. Ravi, do you wish to present the report then, please?
Good evening, councillors. I'm the new private sector housing manager for Nuneaton and Bedworth. I was asked to produce a report for the empty properties in Nuneaton and Bedworth. I do apologise. I've had to subsequently also submit an addendum due to some issues with data the interpretation of the council tax data. So just to walk through the report itself, I gave a national context regarding the situation with empty properties at present, which generally means nationally all empty properties are on the increase. The actual question was around the reasons for the growth of empty properties. I don't really want to be reading through the report unless somebody wants me to. But the general reasons, the national reasons behind why empty properties have increased, and the sort of outstanding figures really are to do with the pandemic now, which are nationally empty properties have shown a 19% increase, and 9 out of 10 local authorities have reported a rise in their empty property figures. As they're saying, they're now saying we're expecting more. We're expecting these figures to rise. And in terms of Nuneaton and Bedworth, I think even though we are on the increase, we're somewhere in the middle or somewhere at the better end of those local authorities that have found an increase in their empty properties. We are currently at, where's it gone? Has seen a 12% increase in empty properties. Now, this data is taken from a national return to the Ministry of Housing, and this is based on long-term empty property figures, and long-term empty property figures are classed as anything which has been empty for 6 months or longer. And those are the figures that those are the properties that we generally tend to focus on, as the remainder of them are known as, are seen as general churn of properties that we most likely find do then go back into use. Of the figures that are on the main report, but actually then subsequently were provided in the addendum, we have a number of properties which have got exemptions, and I have given those in there, even though they're not usually taken when we're looking at figures of empty properties. But I just wanted to explain that a good quarter of our properties do have a legitimate exemption, exemption F being the main one, code F, which is where the main council taxpayer has deceased and probate has not yet been granted. In terms of ward profiles, even with the old data and the newer data, Abbey Ward is still the clear sort of winner in terms of our highest empty properties, and that is the one where Abbey Ward is the one where we have up until now and continue to focus, most of our and first of our interventions. Our interventions currently have been that we've been taking our enforcement action, and we've also proactively been writing out to landlords in the Abbey Ward and providing them incentives such as the empty property loan scheme, and generally also advising them on sort of measures to bring their properties back into use. We still work to the empty property strategy, which is still live from 2018 to 2023. In terms of our resources, we still are only working with one part-time empty property officer to cover the whole of Nuneaton and Bedworth. And obviously that is also now limited in terms of the pandemic as well. And generally speaking, our performance, which obviously has been stunted by the pandemic, but we have brought 96 properties back into use since 2018, 30 enforcement notices, which have resulted in 10 properties which we actually had to carry out works in default. We have said that there's a larger piece of work that we are currently looking into, which is the selective licensing of private rented properties in certain areas within Nuneaton, and the Abbey Ward will definitely class as one of those, which one of the main sort of criteria is being an area of low demand. And as such, that's where you find that your biggest number of empty properties. We had a NABCEL update. Paul, I don't know if we need to provide an update on that or if that's okay, because that was provided by Dawn. But that's the general overview of the report.
So we can't really comment on NABCEL, but that was the response they provided for us. Dawn Dawson provided that response.
Okay, thank you. Dee, could you switch off your camera, please? Everybody can see your.
Sorry.
Yeah, that's better. Thank you. Anybody got any questions? Councillor Elliott.
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to get a bit more explanation about the selective licensing. Can you just explain what that actually means, please? Thanks, Ravi.
Paul, do you want to? We didn't rehearse who was going to take the questions.
No, we didn't. Selective licensing. There's national powers to allow councils to license part of the private sector housing stock, and then for a 5-year period. And so I think with 20% you can do it without going to the Secretary of State for approval, basically. So we can, but should we? So that work needs to be done as to whether we should actually do that and what any scheme would look like if we went forward with it. So it's for officers to look into, I guess, and for members to decide if that's an appropriate thing to do.
So what that would generally entail. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, license to do what? Sorry.
Oh, yeah, I was just going to say what that would generally mean is the areas which are then approved for selective licensing would mean that all privately rented properties within that area would require a license in order to operate. The landlord would require a license which would be issued by us to run a privately rented property, and there would be a fee attached to that license.
And that's similar to something called HMO licensing, which is a mandatory scheme which we currently have to do for shared housing.
Yeah. Does that answer your question, Councillor?
Yeah, so they're being licensed to become rentals. Yeah, thank you.
That's right, yeah.
Councillor Evans.
Thank you very much, Chair. Well, first of all, I think we all have to welcome the fact that since 2009, empty property numbers have fallen by over 100,000. Back in 2013, the coalition government introduced a statutory instrument to the Local Government Finance Act of 1992 to add on to Section 11B that local authorities, as billing authorities, may charge premiums on top of council tax for unoccupied and unfurnished empty properties which have been unoccupied for 2 years or more. The premium can be up to 50% of council tax on the property, and for those empty properties as of the 1st of April 2019, the premium can be up to 100% of the council tax on the property. Do we charge premiums on empty properties in Nuneaton and Bedworth?
I believe we do. I don't have the council tax information, although Paul, am I right in saying that when we spoke to the council tax officer, they were also speaking about yet another rise in that percentage that can be charged? I
believe so. I mean, we can get that clarified, I guess, but we don't deal with the council tax ourselves, so we wouldn't want to mislead you on that. Okay, right. Well, if that information could possibly be presented in a briefing note to members of this committee, I don't know if you're happy for that to happen, Chair.
I've absolutely no problem to that, Councillor Evans.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Condicor.
Thank you, Chair. It takes a minute for the buttons to come off. Welcome to the council. It's a lot of work to the housing in Nuneaton. Paul has done a lot of brilliant work in past years when he had a full-time post to do empty housing, and I passionately believe it is something we should ramp back up to a full-time post, because these 1,600 houses are a massive opportunity if we just get 2% of them back into use, that's 32 homes. So it'd be useful to know if you thought we should up our target and our ambition, and how we can finance that, particularly with a lot of COVID support. I mean, some of these houses, probably about 100 maybe, due to people dying of COVID. I mean, we know there's about 240 COVID deaths in the borough. So there's definitely COVID-related things, and it might be worth asking for some of the various COVID recovery grants to see if we can actually try and get some of those houses back in use, which would help the families and help the whole system recover from COVID, I think, to actually tackle the empty homes problem as a back end of COVID. We also have some empty homes because people have traded up, particularly with the stamp duty cut, this boom and bust the government's doing. We've got a lot of housing that is effectively part exchange. You know, we've got a new McCarthy and Stones in Nuneaton, and people moving into there will then part exchange. So there'll be more housings empty as sort of churn, because obviously new houses is drawing people into the new housing and leaving existing houses behind. So I don't know if we've got any idea, or if we've surveyed the houses that are empty to see how many are the result of, or how many are now owned by property developers, sort of like part exchange. It's a bit like second-hand car salesman, isn't it? You get lots of people selling new cars and they take the old ones. So I don't know what analysis we've done of our empty homes. And for Councillor Evans, there's a very useful spreadsheet issued by the government which actually breaks down all the council tax empties into different categories. And the officers mentioned category F, but it actually lists all the different offices of, I think it's something like A to Z or M. And that's really useful, and it might be useful to print an extract of that in future so we can actually see how many are people going into care. I can't remember all the categories, but it's a very useful bit of information in breaking down how everything's done. And my final point is the ward profiles. It'd be really useful if we had them for the year before, so we can actually see if the big problem we've got in Abbey Ward is actually the same as it was or similar to last year, or whether it is actually an impact of something, say, leaving the EU or more. If we always have on these reports 1 year and the next year, it really does help councillors see trends, because I've got no idea for like Weddington if 120 is a lot more than last year, about the same, or whether actually Weddington is going down. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Anybody wish to say something?
I've got my hand up, Chair. Is that?
No, I just wondering if anything good to say anything about Councillor Condicor's. Was it more or less a statement rather than a?
I mean, I've taken on board everything Councillor Condicor said, and I'll provide the additional information that's requested. The only thing I would say is we're not able to survey, even though we have them down to address. Again, due to resources, we're not able to survey every empty property that comes on the market. So we don't have that information to that finite detail.
Chair, if it helps, I was only suggesting we just picked 30 random empty properties and just did a sort of straw poll just to see if there's any trends. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
There is a possibility we can do that, because I'm all in favour of getting informed information so we can actually make proper decisions. Yes, Councillor Sargent, you were next on the list. Okay. Councillor Sargent.
Thanks. I've sort of reported 3 empty homes, and 2 of them were dealt with very efficiently, and there's now people living in them. One home that I did report, that I thought was empty, turned out that it wasn't empty, and somebody, so the council got involved and it had to be upgraded. So it's all been upgraded, and the person's now living in a better property. So there's running water and electric, etc., whereas before there wasn't. So that's all good. And I believe that there's some grants that people that own these houses can get, or I can't remember whether they were loans or grants, but could you highlight what's available for people if there are empty homes, to sort of bring them up to a good standard so that they can be sold or rented out?
Yeah, I was managing the team when we brought in the loans, and effectively they are loans, and we took away pretty much all the conditions other than they've got to pay them back and end up with someone living in the house. Previously, we had loans for years and years, but there's so many conditions on them, like you've got to house a social tenant or someone off the council housing, that people didn't access them. So we took away all the conditions, and we had some success with getting people and to access them. And basically, it's down to what do you need to do to bring that property back into use. And as long as it ends up with someone in it, whether they do it up to live in it or do it up to sell or do it up to rent, as far as we were concerned, then that's fine. So there is a budget, an annual budget there. It's £10,000 and it's repayable over 5 years without any interest. So it's really there to help people.
Okay, that sounds really good. Anything else, Councillor Sargent?
No, that's fine. Thanks.
Okay. Councillor Guttridge.
Thank you, Chair. I have a couple of points, please. On the addendum, on the wards, we seem to have gained Bablake, which I believe is in Coventry, and the figures don't add up. The figures, you're saying we've got 1,677, but when I do my arithmetic, and I was educated at the local comprehensive school, we get 1,665. So we've got 12 houses that are, you're saying we've got where we haven't got. That's just a small point on my part. Also, I'd like to follow on from what Councillor Sargent said. These grants or loans, whatever you want, I know of one or two people, not in the Borough of Nuneaton Bedworth, who have taken these loans and they've done the property up, the small property, and then let it out to the young people. And it has worked very well. And I think the council ought to promote this more for the youngsters, because it gives them a start on the property ladder. We don't want to get them into debt, but we want to help them to get on the property ladder to move forward. That's how I started. Also, on the report, on paragraph 6, empty property strategy, could you tell me how we're doing on that? Are we getting many empty properties sorted out, or what, or any that are not habitable? What are we doing about that to bring those back into the system, that we can try and get people renting them out or selling them or getting people into them and bringing down the numbers?
Can I just start by apologising for the first 2 points? They're entirely mine. I'm not from around here and I'm new, so my fault. I should have checked the wards.
I understand, thank you.
But I did check with council tax because it was the data that came from there, and just to reassure, they have now updated their system as well, so that they no longer record anything under Bablake ward. So that was actually quite helpful because it came from their data. With regards to the 12 properties lost, that's probably a sign of my really poor Excel skills. So again, I will apologise for that. That's just my arithmetic and nothing more than that. With regards to what we're doing, I did give as much as I could in terms of what we're doing and how much we've brought back into use. And we are also working through the bond scheme. So the private sector bond scheme, where we can try and incentivise that way as well. I don't know if Paul can help and add any more onto that from before I've arrived, but in all honesty, since I've come in, all I'm doing is just dealing with COVID and trying to just, at the moment, we're just keeping the lid on and just making sure that things don't get any worse than they already are.
Yeah, to explain about the bond scheme, this is done through the housing department, the homeless department, and they have a bond which guarantees the deposit basically for new tenants. Private sector housing inspects the property to make sure it's up to a decent standard, or at least fit to live in, and then the homeless team, Housing Solutions, they provide this guarantee basically of the deposit to get the youngsters in or new tenants in. That is the majority of the results that we get. They're not necessarily long-term properties, long-term empty properties. So the private sector housing team tends to concentrate on the longer-term empties, but there is that provision for new tenants and that bond deposit support to help them get into properties.
Good. Does that answer your questions, Councillor? Councillor Gottridge, are you all right with that?
If you could send me the information, I would be very grateful, and thank you for that. Thank you.
Okay. Mrs. Ross.
Yeah. I looked through the notes, but I couldn't find anything on compulsory purchase. Is there a criteria for compulsory purchase on any of the empty properties?
You're very faint, Mrs. Ross, but I believe you said something about compulsory purchase.
Yeah. Compulsory purchase. Is there a criteria for compulsory purchase of these empty properties?
The general criteria for compulsory orders is where the property is becoming a nuisance to the neighbourhood or is causing some sort of a detriment to the neighbourhood. So a lot of these empty properties, even though they're left empty, landlord or the owners will generally keep on top of, overgrown gardens and that kind of thing. And they generally are kept where they're not. The first sort of port of call we have is to take the enforcement action, serve Section 215s, clear things out. But where generally properties are getting dilapidated and the longer term financial implication on the council to keep on doing these works in default, then because I suppose the argument is that it's a person's choice what they want to do with their property. So in order for a compulsory purchase order, we have to have something which needs to take that right away from them. So it's very, very, very few and far between where we do manage to get compulsory purchase orders on properties. And that's not here, that's across all local authorities that I've worked in.
Thank you.
Thank you. Before I bring Councillor Sargent back in again, is there anybody who hasn't spoken wish to speak? Oh, you've taken your hand up. Oh, Andy.
Yeah, sorry, yeah, left it.
Chair, I believe I had my hand raised, but
I haven't got you up here, but yes, Councillor Brown, yes, I've got you now.
Thank you, Chair. I would just like to mention that we need to bear in mind when we're looking at these as bare statistics that in many of these cases, especially during the current pandemic situation, we have situations where properties have become empty because people have gone into care, people have gone to hospital, and relatives really struggling to bring properties to market in the current situation. Especially where people have perhaps gone to care and they're suffering with dementia, the delays in getting deputies appointed to act under the mental health legislation can take 4 or 5 months quite easily. Probate registry can take up to 2 years to award probate in some cases, and yet we can misinterpret, if we're not careful, that these properties are being willfully withheld from the market, when in fact families are struggling to perhaps in some cases pay for their relatives to be in care, and they're not able to access the funds because, especially now, they're struggling to get properties renovated and struggling with paperwork and other things, in a situation where we quite often got relatives of people who've gone into care themselves are not able to access online banking and get bank accounts and things. So there's a myriad of stories that may be behind this data, and it's very easy for us to try and take a one-size-fits-all approach to it. So I think that we need to be quite sensitive to the data and be willing to understand that there may well be a temporary increase in properties defined as being empty because they're more than 6 months empty, when in fact they're not intentionally empty in that sense. And we need to be sensitive to that. Thank you.
Yeah, I think not to generalise things, but yes, I think we have to be sensitive to actually what's happening at the present moment. We don't know what's going to happen when our so-called new normal, whatever that's going to be, and when that's going to be in place. I haven't got a crystal ball, and hopefully it's not too far away and we can get back to some sort of understanding what's happening. And of course, the sensitivity thing is, I think it's all important, and I'm sure that we as an authority would be as sensitive as possible under these at times trying circumstances. Anybody else wish to say anything about the report?
Can I
echo your name up? Yeah.
Can I echo your thoughts and what Councillor Brown has said? I, at the moment, and my family are going through a probate situation. We lost mother back in February, and the solicitor is saying we've got another 6 months at least before probate will be gathered because of obviously with the pandemic and unfortunately losing a lot of people. Thank you.
My condolences to you and your family. I have members of my family as well lost through COVID as well. Councillor Gondekar again.
Thank you. Can I just ask, is this coming back to us in about a year's time so we can monitor progress? Because that would be a good step, particularly with all the things from, as others have said, probate and things should have settled down hopefully in a year's time.
I can't see that being a particular problem. If we get a report up and bring it back to the panel so we can see what, let's use the buzzwords again, the new norm is going to be, or what it's going to be at that time. I think that's a good suggestion. Mrs. Ross, you've got your hand up. Do you wish to speak again? Okay, thank you. So thanks for the report, both, and welcome to Nuneaton and Bedworth, and take on board what the panel said, and if we get more information, I think informed choices are far better rather than ill-formed choices. So thanks for your report, and welcome to the borough.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
thank you, Chair. Thank you, councillors.
Bye-bye.
Right, item number 7, David, you're going to take this.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. Obviously, the last time we were at OSP was in June of last year, where we brought the draft framework document for discussion. Since then, obviously, we've undertaken further consultation with external partners, including local funeral directors, to provide us with a robust document going forwards on cemetery regulations. At the same time as that, we've seen changes in our administrative practices, including the bedding in of the new cemetery management software, and that has highlighted to us instances where we have practices which were starting to fall outside of the regulations because of the lack of clarity, both for officers and for users of the service. And obviously the intention was to come back with a revised set of regulations to provide that clarity going forward. Following structure change to the Parks and Green Spaces team that came into effect in November, the administration element of cemetery duties now sits within the business support and administration team. That includes the cemetery officer post, although that post is currently vacant and we're waiting to recruit to fill that. following our last report, we commissioned a review of our current practices and procedures from Ian Quantz, a fellow of the Institute of Crematoria and Cemetery Management, and its former president, actually. And his report identified a number of points which we're currently working through. Our priority over at this time was to get the cemetery regulations brought up to date, and they are obviously available for the panel to see at Appendix 1, and I'll go through those in the report, but obviously the full regulations are available at Appendix 1. The regulations themselves, we've attempted to break them down rather than having a single set, one complete document. We've attempted to break them down into a series of documents that makes it slightly easier for people to access and understand. So there are the current description of services, which details their locations of our current cemeteries, and indeed some of the closed churchyards that we currently maintain. There's a section on general rules and regulations, which would be of particular interest to members of the public. It deals with what is expected from the public when using the facilities, and indeed the duties that we will need to perform. There's details on exclusive rights burial and the guide to memorials and memorial applications. And then there are two other sections relating to rules and regulations for funeral organisers, that's the funeral directors and stonemasons who may be erecting memorials within the cemetery. In order to provide further guidance on that, we're developing a series of guidance and specifications for different areas by means of a cemetery advice and guidance note, which is in Appendix 2. There are some example headings there of proposed guidance notes, and we've got a worked example at the end of that to give members an idea of what we would be producing, and it's to provide clear guidance both for the public, because we will be putting these on our website, but also for the officers that may be dealing with an inquiry at that time. Moving on to our fees and pricing, obviously we've been working towards bringing the service towards cost neutrality, and Appendix 3 shows some proposed amendments that we're asking you to consider that will allow for greater consistency and transparency. We've sought to clarify some of our administrative charges that previously varied between different activities, and we've taken to basing that basically on the hourly rate of our cemetery officer post in order to provide some form of clarity for people going forwards. Members will be aware that the fees that we charge for cemetery services are tripled for non-residents, and we've had a number of cases, certainly in the time I've been looking at cemeteries, where people have been looking for exceptions, and particularly in the current circumstances that has become increasingly relevant, particularly where we have residents who may have spent the vast majority, if not all of their life as a resident of the borough, but which for reasons beyond their control, their final years may not be within the borough. That may be because they've had to move into a care home, or it may be that they are being cared for by family members that live outside of the borough boundaries. And so what we were trying to propose was a rule that would allow officers to exercise some discretion. And it was whereby if a person has passed away after residing outside of the borough for a period not exceeding 24 months, that we would consider them to be classed as a resident for the purposes of those fees and charges. That's something we'd like you to consider. There are a number of changes to administration fees for things such as surrendering exclusive rights. That's where somebody wants to sell us back the balance of an exclusive right where they've taken one out previously. We deal with things like exhumation requests. We don't get very many, but where we do, obviously all of our pre-application advice would be free of charge, but the actual application process and the exhumation itself, we would see charges for those. And we are starting to see requests coming through for genealogy searches. That's where people are searching their family history. Now, we didn't currently charge for any of those requests, and we have, you'll see in our report at section C, we've identified a number of authorities where they've put some fees and charges together. A lot of them do this online, and obviously where that's possible, there would be no charge for that. We're currently not in a position to do that here yet, because we need to finish cleansing our systems now that we've moved all of our records over. And we need to have a negotiation with our system supplier at the moment, because I understand that may incur some further charges. We need to understand what those are. Typically, such an application would only take 30 minutes, and hence the charge is half of what the normal fee would be. For items such as memorial benches, trees and boulders and such like, we've outlined there that the costs are at cost. So it's the cost of the product, which varies depending on what the individual chooses. And delivery charges vary again according to the carriers. And our administration charge is merely to cover that. Section 7 deals with our proposals. The consultant obviously provided the authority with a list of recommendations, which are there to see in Appendix 4. And we've asked that those be put into an action plan for the Cemeteries Office to explore and bring forward on the points that they've raised. We'd ask you to ask for your guidance on the exception to, as detailed in 6.4, regarding residents who pass while living outside of the borough, and the additional fees that are in section 6.6. We're also asking members to consider permitting the purchase of both single and 2 adjacent plots as a reservation. Obviously, this would allow family members potentially to be interred together, which would in turn permit the erection potentially of either a dual head or twin curb set, whilst the purchase price would remain per plot. It's something where we've noticed people who are asking for effectively an area where they can keep their families together, rather than them necessarily being in different sections of the cemetery. And members may wish to consider that we reserve a section of the cemetery for such reservations to assist with the management going on from that. The consultant also suggested that, and we've looked at our lease arrangements. There was a change where we had reduced the availability of a lease for exclusive rights to 30 years before it was increased again to 50. And we were asking members to consider whether or not there may be an opportunity for us to offer those members of the public that originally received a 30-year lease to uplift to 50 years on a pro rata basis, only in those circumstances. And we would ask you to consider that. The consultant suggested that the standard grave size be increased to 1.5 by 3 metres from the current 1.25 by 2.75. That is one, to accommodate, we are beginning to see an increase in the size of coffins and caskets that are being offered, and also from an operational perspective, in where we have to reopen a grave at some point in the future, in assisting with access to do that and ongoing maintenance. The final one that I would just like to bring to your attention would be the exception for the ownership into an infant's grave that is in Appendix D. That is where an infant has passed away, and the scenario that we have come across, thankfully not on too many occasions, but it is where an infant passes away whilst mother and child were in hospital. Typically that means that the burial arrangements are undertaken by the father in a number of cases. Should that relationship subsequently break down, that may leave the mother with no rights to the grave that their child is buried in. And we've asked members to consider that as an exception, whereby we would allow both parents to be joint owners of the grave in those circumstances. And I'll bring you to section 8 with our recommendations that you provide us with your guidance, and that you agree the revised fees and charges, and any further recommendations that were proposed in Appendix 4.
Thank you, David. Once again, another sensitive subject. So, Councillor Evans.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to just raise a few points around paragraph 6.4 in relation to the exception rule for non-residents. I just want to give you an example in my own ward, if I can, David. You might be aware of Cowleys,
Yes.
which is on Astley Lane. Quite weird. One side of the road is in Nuneaton and Bedworth, the other side is in North Warwickshire, and that's where, and Cowley's care home is on the North Warwickshire side. But the vast majority of residents in that care home have lived in Bedworth all their lives. So my slight issue with this is that you might have an individual who's lived in Bedworth for 70 years, but the last 3 years of their life has been spent at Cowley's care home, and unfortunately they wouldn't be classed that exemption. And I just feel that perhaps wider discretion should be given for those specific cases where you have people in care homes just across our border. I mean, it's just a few meters over the border, and I just find it a bit sad in some respects that, you know, actually a resident who's lived in Bedworth all their lives might not be able to get this exemption. And I'm sure it's the same case in perhaps in the north of the Nuneaton, where maybe residents have lived in the Nuneaton for many years, but have had to go into a care home across the border in North Warwickshire. So yeah, I just wanted to put that point out there, really.
Chair, if I may.
Yes, Moment.
Thank you, Councillor Evans. And the example that you gave us is one that we are actually aware of. In preparing this report, the suggestion of a period of 24 months at this stage is exactly that. Obviously, we're ready to receive your guidance on that in terms of determining what would be a suitable cut-off point, whether or not we make exceptions where individuals may be within a named care facility. But then we'd need to understand how we would accommodate that where, for example, a resident perhaps moves in with their wider family in those circumstances, but still wishes to be considered a Bedworth resident. So I appreciate where you are coming from. That period of 24 months was in a sense to drive discussion, and we're ready to amend that as appropriate.
Councillor Evans.
I'll let Councillor Brown speak. I just thinking. Sorry.
Okay, can I just put in I'll just a smidgen of some sort of interest. I have a relation that's actually employed at Cowley's, because the name's been mentioned. I think I better just say that, but it's nothing more than that. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm entirely sympathetic to the situation that Councillor Evans has just raised, and also the situation that David Truslove has identified, where, you know, it's not uncommon these days for people to go and live with extended family when they move into care, if you like. I'm personally very lucky. My grand's approaching 107th birthday, and she's only been living in care for the past year. But had that care home have been outside of the borough where she lives, under our rules, then she might not have qualified for an exemption in a town where she's literally the eldest person that lives in that town. So yeah, I'm entirely sympathetic to what Councillor Evans has said, and just to drive discussion forward, I'll be quite happy to look at a 5-year period on this. But the other thing I would just like to raise on here was to do with paragraph 6.6c, the genealogy searches. And again, as this is becoming something that's more popular, I understand the need and the desire to introduce some sort of charge, because clearly the work that people are doing to assist people has a cost to it. But I would like to see us offer that data set free of charge when we are possible, and that this is not just a situation where we have the data. I think as a public authority, public bodies national, I think we have a duty to make data sets available to the public free of charge wherever it's possible to do so without compromising the usual GDPR and those type of regulations. And if there's increased demand for this type of service, then all the more reason to offer it as a self-service online service when we can. So I'm quite happy to look at introducing some sort of charge in the meantime, and where additional help is sought by an inquirer who perhaps does some research online for free, but then decides they need additional input and or specialist assistance from us, then quite rightly that should be covered by the cost that we charge. But yes, just to go back to my first point, I would quite happily put forward a 5-year period just to drive discussion. I'd be interested to hear what other people think. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll second that.
Councillor Condicor.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yeah, I'm very sympathetic to the case of people who've moved out of the borough for care. Quite a few people going to Hartshill, where there's a few care homes as well. As there's not a lot in the actual boundaries of Nuneaton and Bedworth at the moment to cope for the volume of people getting older. So I'm happy to go with either 5 years or some distance or list of care homes that will be considered as being part of the wider care economy, or whatever you want to call it, for Nuneaton and Bedworth. On a different matter, in the report it talks about making the plots bigger, which obviously gives us concern if there's a shortage of plots, but without quite a lot of work done at Oaston Road to claim some new plots back from where there was houses and paths and things. So I think it was useful before we decide on making plots to have some reassurance that we are got a plentiful supply now with the changes. And I'm always quite keen to know whether it's a metric or the feet is actually the definitive thing, because we should say 1.5 meters brackets approximately 5 feet, so that people know. Yeah, it just stops things, particularly because things don't always fit exactly as the number of feet. It would be quite nice to define things as being metric measures and having the imperial as the approximation, and whether we do need to go from 1.25 to 1.5 meters, or whether 1.4, 1.45. So I say it's one of these things where if you double a plot in both directions, you start losing quite a lot of land quite quickly. So although 1.45 meters might not sound a lot, actually in a rubber plot you get another 1 in per 30 or something. So I do think we need to be reassured we've actually got a way out of this. And also, are we losing any plots due to the flooding issues we've got, or is there a solution to that doesn't take up land? Because that seems to be an ongoing issue, and it will get worse as we get more and more climate change and heavy rain. So I think the flooding issue is something that we do need to nail down as well. Thank you, Chair.
David, have you got any answers for that? For those questions?
Thank you, Chair. With reference to the sizes, obviously, I speak as someone who's aware that we've been using the metric system since before I was born. But within the funeral industry, imperial measurements are still the ones that are used. So when a funeral director submits their application to us, it will be measured in imperial. We are currently looking at our software to see whether it would automatically convert that. because I'm conscious that as time goes by, increasingly the people that are managing the service within the cemetery itself, that there's an element of confusion that can come into measurements, and it is important that we ensure that they are correct. The dimensions that have been mentioned are those that the consultant provided as the current best practice. And the suggestion was that our current arrangements, that the plots themselves are undersized. They are the bare minimum, and we are experiencing at times some difficulties, particularly with ground conditions, and also the changes in population, which means we are seeing larger caskets that are coming to our cemeteries. In terms of numbers and figures, our current total burial capacity, that's including children's plots, full burial plots, both lawn and curb section, cremation plots and short notice burial plots, totals just over 2,000 available plots at the moment, which, based on the figures that I received just before Christmas, over the last 5 years, we've seen an average of 94 new full burials plots a year. It ranges between sort of, I think it's, let me just bear with me. It ranged between 83 and 108 over the last 5 years, but the average is 94, on which basis our current burial capacity across our cemeteries provides with just over 7 years capacity. If we adopt the new revised standard, that would still give us just over 6 years capacity, and that doesn't take into account the option. Obviously, I appreciate it's early days, but obviously we've got options on extending Marston Lane Cemetery that we are currently looking at. Chair.
Okay.
Chair, can I just also the issue of flooding to see whether that is having an impact?
Sorry, Councillor. Yes, flooding, obviously we were experiencing some flooding. Our main cemeteries now are obviously Ouston Road and Marston Lane. Coventry Road and Attleborough are full for the purposes of new full burials. And Stockingford, Bucks Hill Cemetery now only has capacity for children's burials, although there are still ashes interments available. Obviously at Ouston Road, since we've moved to the new section, the where we were previously interring, which was at the bottom of the cemetery, closest to the railway line, we were having issues with flooding there, and what we are tending to do with those last remaining plots is we will only make those available to use during the summer period. But we are actively using the upper part of the cemetery where the lodge previously was situated. With regards to Marston Lane, members may have noted that we're only making the option of a triple burial plot available at Ouston Road, and that is because of the ground conditions at Marston Lane, because there are bands of sand running throughout the cemetery, and it's not safe or practicable for us to make that offer. We do occasionally have a grave collapse when we're in the process of preparing it, which means we have to obviously prepare a new one. But obviously we have a duty to the operatives who are undertaking that work. So Marston Lane will be restricted to only two full burials within a plot.
Okay. Okay. Councillor Guttridge.
Thank you, Chair. I welcome this subject. Unfortunately, we have to be very careful and mindful of what the subject is with burials and cremations. I'd like to ask a few questions. David, it picked up on Councillor Condorker's comments. Did you tell us there was 2,000 burial places available in the borough at the moment?
There's including all burial plots. This was data that was updated as of 31st of December 2020, including children's plots, full burial plots, that's lawn section and curb section, cremation plots, short notice burial plots. That is typically the section of the cemetery is used by a Muslim community.
Yeah, I understand.
That gives us a current total capacity at 31st of December of 2,124. Obviously, as I say, the data that I gave you in terms of numbers of 94, that relates to full burials. That's a coffin burial, of which we see approximately 94 on average.
So we're doing, say, 100 burials maximum, probably.
Yeah.
So we have got plenty of burial places vacant at the moment for the next considerable years.
On that basis, we would, if we were to use every available plot, and I appreciate that there are different, there are different circumstances there. You've got full burial plots and you've got cremation plots. But if we were to use every plot that was available, then we currently have approximately 7 years supply. Yeah,
I understand that. Going back to the start of the report and the guy who commissioned it, I did ask when we were asking about it, did he speak to the Coventry Diocese? Because, i.e., Bolkington is an open churchyard which the parishioners of Bolkington pay for and maintain. And obviously there's different regulations for a churchyard that is open than the ones that are closed. i.e., I've got a question to ask about on page, where is it? On the, I wrote it all down so I wouldn't be. On page 61 of your report, it says floral tributes. Now, I know I have sat on the church committee at Bolkington for many years, and I am off at the moment. We had a lot of trouble with memorials in the churchyard, different ones, trying to do a standardised memorial, which the diocese said, and it was a very emotive subject, and we had lots of problems with it. And the flowers that people come and tender the graves, some people come with artificial and some with real, because some come with artificial because they can't get to the grave that many times. What is the rule and regulation for the cemeteries and the burial plots in Nuneaton and Bedworth, please? On flowers. Flowers and memorials.
Flowers and memorials. Obviously, the guidance to memorials for grave owners at Appendix E outlines it in broad terms, but in terms of floral tributes, obviously, if they're real flowers, then obviously we would leave them in situ until such time as they've perished, and then we would arrange for them to be removed. But we don't have any restrictions on people using artificial flowers, for example. Our only request, and indeed, if necessary, we would write to people with a view to, if ultimately enforcing, we would ask people to keep them within the curtilage of their plot. We have experienced some cases where floral tributes have exceeded the size of the plot, and if that is excessive, then we would write to the grave owners and ask them to rectify that.
Yeah, we've had yes, I understand with the children's plots, and we've had some young people buried in Bolkington and they want different type headstones and different memorials, and it is a bit of a problem at times.
Sorry, Councillor.
I understand, the full report, and I agree, go along with most of the report.
Thanks for that. Councillor Tandy.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, first off, Chair, I think we should be saying thank you to our officers for this comprehensive report, because I think it covers almost every single issue and has to cover every single issue that we've been talking about. I certainly agree with most of the comments that have been made about how people feel. Councillor Brown mentioned about the charging on the genealogy charges. Just a quick point on the flooding, because obviously both Councillor Sargent and I are again involved in some flooding that's happening at Attleborough Cemetery, and he and I have been looking into this now for some considerable time. It isn't an easy one to solve because of it's not rain coming down, it's water coming up that's causing the problem, which means that the rain coming down isn't going away. But we're still working on that, just to put people's minds at rest. Bearing in mind those comments, Chair, I am quite prepared, and listening to what everyone has said, to move the recommendation as printed, but to change, as has been suggested, the 2 years for people living outside of the borough to 5 years. Quite happy to do that, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Elliott.
Sorry, Chair. Yeah, I'm happy to second that. I was going to ask something else, but I'll just leave it as seconding Councillor Tandy's proposal there.
Well, Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, some problem unmuting there. Yeah, if you remember, I proposed this earlier,
Yeah,
and Councillor Evans seconded in any case.
Yeah.
But I do welcome the support from Councillors Tandy and Elliott. Much appreciated. Thank you.
Councillor Condicor.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm happy, as David has explained, we've got enough space for the recommendation to extend the graves, and I'm happy with everything else. The one thing I would just like clarifying is we actually put either the metric or the imperial, I don't care which, as actually in the rules, because there are actually slightly different measurements, and put the other one as an approximate or whatever, just so that we just nail down exactly what the size of everything is. And if the funeral industry uses feet, the recommendation should say 5 feet by 10 or whatever, and then we can have the centimetres as an approximate, just so we know, and we don't have any of these troubles in future with people measuring from one end in inches and one end in feet. If we use one set of units and have it clear and have the other one clearly marked as approximate, I'm totally happy with everything suggested. Thank you.
Councillor Phillips. Councillor Phillips, we can hear a noise in the background, but can't hear your good self. Neil, speak to us. Still can't hear you, Neil.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we've got you now.
Right, it's earphones. I'm sorry about that, everybody. Yeah, I'll support the 5 years as put forward by Councillor Brown, and also the fact I would be quite happy to see the sizing in Imperial with approximately to the metric share.
Okay, thanks. There's I'm getting a consensus here, and I'm sure because the first proposal and the first proposal which was seconded, and then there was another proposal which came up with seconded, they seem like like-minded proposals. So I would take it as all of them are friendly proposals, and we know what we're actually voting on. Councillor Brown.
Oh, beg your pardon, Chair. Legacy hand.
Okay. Well, you can take a go then. So, assuming that everybody is quite happy with those, David, with the comments that everybody's been made, you can take them on hand about the 5 years and everything else that's been said, and pass them forward to the cabinet as recommendations from this panel. Everybody all right with that? I see no dissent, so thank you, David, and thanks for a very good report. It's something we've got to do as part of our duties as local councillors, and I'm sure that it'll be well received in other places. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you all.
Right, back to the agenda. The forward plan, page 73, that's for information. Okay, the work programme, page 77. Okay, and I'll go into item number 10 now. There's, I'm sorry for the way that this has come about. Is that we had our working party have looked at the PSOs and alcohol last Friday, and the consensus was that we should try and get it into place as soon as possible. So I agreed with the chair, Councillor Sargent's agreement and the working party's agreement that we should take it forward tonight to make sure that it goes to the proper places so we can actually get it up and running as a bylaw or whatever it's called as soon as possible. Councillor Sargent, is that something along the same sort of lines as what we were thinking?
Yes, that's correct. I think, yeah, if we can get it moved on, that would be brilliant, because at the minute, obviously, there's kind of no protection there, or no tool for the police or the council to use. So yeah.
There was also, if I can make the panel aware, we were on about the different substances. Is that, I can't think of the right word. Could you think of the right word, Andy?
It was Councillor Evans will know, won't he?
Psychoactive.
Psychoactive. That's
Nitric oxide.
We couldn't actually get it within this what's been suggested tonight. And we were hoping that in the next couple of weeks, or couple of 3 weeks, something would be set up in order to see whether we can include another PSO in order to take it a step further. But we thought, in the meanwhile, we had to get this into place as soon as possible. So that's why I brought it forward as an emergency item tonight. Councillor Wilson.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Also at the working party meeting, there was some concern about any future delays, about future PSPOs, which we might want to look at, because I know that there are a number of items on the agenda, for example, sale of cars by the highway, possibly looking at encampments on public land, etc. So there's a number of issues which we want to look at. But there was concern, Chair, about potential delays at having to refer everything back to this committee, this overview and scrutiny panel, because then that could cause a further delay in getting out to the consultation that we need to have, because it has to be authorised by Cabinet. So I think the committee also this panel needs to also consider whether it authorises the working group to pass recommendations straight to Cabinet to get them out to consultation as quickly as possible. Because, for example, Chair, we could, in theory, meet this Friday, decide to put the psychoactive substances forward. We would then have to wait possibly up to 6, 7, 8 weeks for the next overview and scrutiny panel. and then possibly wait another 4 weeks for it to coincide with another cabinet meeting. And I think these are subjects where we want to try and get the protections in for our residents as quickly as possible. So I can see why we would want to bring it back to overview and scrutiny panel, but I think there needs to be a balance struck between bringing everything back here and making progress on these outstanding issues, where we could, in theory, move the working group, which I think everyone here is on the overview and scrutiny panel anyway, and move that straight to cabinet to then get out to consultation so we get to the residents as quickly as possible and reduce delays. So I think we need to consider that as well, Chair.
There's before I bring other councillors in, I actually raised this at the working party to say that the reason the working parties were set up was so you could go into more detailed on what was happening, and the recommendation comes back to the parent panel, which is this, and that's why this was brought up as an emergency. I will have done any other business tonight. My problem, and I still have the same problem, is that working parties were set up in order to do that and report back to the parent panel. And Mr. Richardson, could you tell us what the Constitution says, or what we can do or what we can't do? Because what I don't want to do is to set up a precedent that might affect us for the next so many years, and I'm not saying short circuit the democratic process, but somehow cuts through what we're supposed to do. Philip, can you give us some advice, please?
Yes, Chair. I think the first thing I would say is that, as you say, there is a sort of, if you like, a chain of delegation that exists between the panel and the working party. So if you wanted to short circuit it, I think the only way you could do that would be through an officer delegation. So the panel could delegate to an officer to report to cabinet if that's what you wanted to do. I'm not entirely sure that the Constitution specifically deals with the point around a working party reporting direct, but it would be unusual to say the least. And actually, in terms of the, if you like, the standing of the working party, it is effectively a working party of the parent committee. So unless the parent committee was to delegate that, and the only way it could do it would be through a delegation to an officer. I can't see how else it could do it.
Okay, with that advice, Councillor Tandy.
Thank you, Chair. I take on board everything that Councillor Wilson has said about the need to try and get these PSPOs in order as quickly as we can. Also, listening to what Mr. Richardson says, I think like you that every member of the committee should have an opportunity, of this committee, should have an opportunity to see what the panel, the working party, has agreed prior to it going to cabinet. Is there a way in which that could happen, perhaps by circulating the views of the working party to every member of this committee so that their views can be ascertained, and if there was too many objections to the PSPO as the working party had looked at it, then it would need then to come back to this overview and scrutiny. Excuse me. It would then be able to come back to this overview and scrutiny committee, because I do think every member of this panel, of this overview and scrutiny committee, should see what the working party has agreed or suggested prior to it going to cabinet. I'm only just trying to think out the top of my head a way we can get the information through quicker than it might go under normal circumstances, rather than just saying no. But I would also add to that, Chair, that if that was to happen, if that was agreed and that was to happen, that we would need to make it clear that this was only in relation, this was not setting a precedent, it was only in relation to the PSPOs that we would do what I've suggested. Just a suggestion, Chair, others may feel differently.
Okay, there's Councillor Condacor.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm sort of agreeing with Councillor Tandy. I think we need to just have a mechanism to fast track things that are non-controversial, like the alcohol one, but make sure that everyone knows it's happening, so someone can actually raise a hand if there is an issue. We're fortunate in the working group to have a Green and Independent and people from the other two larger parties, so we are representative in breadth of parties. And I think Councillor Tandy is right that other councillors should be copied in case they've got a particular issue. But I think with the possible ending of lockdown at some unknown point, we do need to make sure we've got these things in place for when the country opens up, because without public space protection orders, we could have troubles with alcohol and other things which are hard to deal with if the police don't have these orders. So I think we do need to have an exceptional, quick way of doing it, and that does need to have the caveat that it has unanimous support rather than being anything controversial. Thank you, Chair.
I've got two speakers, and I would like to make a suggestion of a way forward. Councillor Brown.
Many thanks, Chair. Yeah, I sit on the boards of a number of other organisations outside this council where they operate in exactly the way that Councillor Tandy has suggested, so that a working party or a task and finish group can actually make a recommendation. It's copied to all members. There's no need for a separate meeting, and as long as there's a majority in favour of a proposal, then the committee can refer or take the action. And I think we could possibly get around this by changing the terms of reference of the working party or amending them slightly to allow them to refer direct to Cabinet once the proposal has been circulated to this scrutiny panel, and provided no dissent is received or no serious dissent is received within a set period of time. That allows Councillor Wilson's idea of swift action to proceed, but also manages to keep everybody informed and allow anybody that has serious dissent with the proposed course of action to make that known. And it could be quite easily done in the email to make it clear that this is for a decision rather than just for information purposes, which is commonplace outside of the council. So yeah, I broadly support what Councillor Tandy says, as long as we do it in a way that it's reflected in the terms of the working party to allow them to do so. I would assume that Director Richardson would be able to say whether or not that's permitted by the Constitution, or if it's not, or if it's silent on that. I suggest we can go ahead.
I've got a suggestion to make in a minute before I bring Philip back in. But Councillor Elliott.
Thanks, Chair. I just think it's really important that the working party stays under the umbrella of the IOSP, because it's not possible to sit on every single working party, and indeed Councillor Wilson was absent from the first working party, so I think it's really important that it stays under the umbrella. Thanks, Chair.
Yes, what I would like to do is, if I can, if the panel's willing to do it, can I take it accepted that the recommendations we've made, that the working party has made on which is in front of you tonight, is agreed that should be taken forward. Does everybody agree with that? So we get that out the way, then we can talk about the actual next step, if that's the right way. Everybody,
Chair.
everybody all right with that?
Indeed.
If you need a formal recommendation, I will move that, Chair.
I'm sure that'll find a second there.
Seconded, Councillor Wilson.
Okay, so that's, I find, everybody in favour of that? I see no dissent, so we'll get that out of the way, and thanks for that. The thing, which there's, when I'm actually saying I've got concerns about the Constitution and the way working parties work, I understand that there isn't too many PSOs knocking about. So we've only got a couple of perhaps. In fact, I think we might be just looking at there's some things that a PSO can't agree. There's, like somebody was mentioning about the car sales, etc., etc. That might have more trading standards, particular problems, and what we can do as a borough. But there's nothing stopping working party having a look at that. What do you think is the best way forward for us, Philip? Because what I was thinking, as everybody was saying, is that on the substance abuse thing, it might take a couple of 3 weeks in order to get some report up and running. And if we're trying to take that forward to Cabinet ASP in order to get that up and running, and then the next meeting might, in fact, the same meeting might be discussing the car sale thing, but I don't think there's that many PSOs. And can we make this not a thing that's going to last forever? Can we do this as a temporary thing, Philip, or does it have to be written in stone?
I think, Chair, that there might be a way forward. As I mentioned earlier, I'm not entirely sure we can do what Councillor Brown has said exactly. I don't think it's a case of this committee can amend the terms of reference of the working party to give the working party authority to report direct to Cabinet. And I think the reason for that is just the general law around delegations and responsibilities. What the panel could do, though, and it's a sort of a crossover between everything that I think all members have said, is that it is delegated authority to an officer to report to Cabinet the results of the working party following a consultation with all members of the OSP, and as has been suggested, that delegation is limited to where the comments from all of the panel members is consistent. In other words, it's a unanimous support for that to go forward to Cabinet, in which case that report could then go forward. I don't think there's any other way you can get around the general principles that are set out in the Local Government Act in terms of decision making and as I say, the chain of responsibility and the chain of power. So and that's simply because the working party is not a constituted body in terms of the council's decision-making process. Mm-hmm. It is very much a working party, which would have to then feed into an organ of the organisation, which is either going to be this panel or in this case, an officer, I think. So it's got to be done on that basis, I think, if it's going to be done at all.
Okay. Councillor Doughty.
Thank you, Chair. Can't we just leave it as it is? Why are we, if there's not a lot of like you said, orders that needed attention, and it seems that we're setting some sort of precedent that isn't really, you know, what's been done before, and working parties are there to report back to parent panels. So why are we looking at changing this? That's just my proposal, really. We should just leave as is if it's working.
Okay, thanks, Councillor. The intention, as I understand it, Councillor, is that because everybody thinks that that they're important subjects that should be looked at, and consequently we should try and get them as a bylaw or whatever the term may be as soon as possible. The suggestion that Philip Richardson's making, I don't think is a bad suggestion. That the fact that the working panel has already agreed that we're going to have a look at the substance abuse thing, and we're going to have a look at the selling of cars, etc., from this side of byways or highways or whatever you want to take, whatever you want to say. And they're the only two subjects, as I know, currently. So I'm trying to think of the best way to do it would still is for the working party to meet at, we've said before that Councillor Sargent, when he gets the I's and T's crossed and various other things through officers, he can get a working party up and running. And if we agree what Philip was saying, is that we as the working party would pass on the information to the parent panel to see if there's any dissent or any further questions that could be asked or should be asked, and then that delegated authority could be given to the officer who's serving the working party to take forward to Cabinet. Am I getting that right, Philip, or is it am I all over the place?
I think you're just about there, Chair. I mean, you could phrase it in a number of different ways, but if you said it was delegated authority to the officer to undertake the consultation of the members of the panel, and then subject to that being unanimous, so there was no dissension, then the officer can then use delegated authority to then refer it straight on to Cabinet. So it short circuits and removes any delay. There are other ways you could do it similar to that, but broadly speaking, that's it.
Because I'm all in favour of working parties. I always have been. Is that members can actually.
What Phil Richardson's proposes an acceptable compromise. This isn't about trying to stop scrutiny or reinvent the wheel. This is about trying to prevent unnecessary delay wherever possible. Because as I said to begin with, if you think about the timelines, you could, between now and the next overview and scrutiny, have a delay of up to 6 weeks, possibly more. Then you've got to wait for Cabinet to convene and also meet the requirements of putting the paperwork on the Cabinet agenda. So that could be up to another 4 weeks. Then you've got the period of consultation, which could be anything between 4 to 8 weeks. Then you've got Cabinet to consider the responses. Then you've got to refer it to full council to actually adopt the order, as I understand it. That's an awful lot of delay, which could take, in theory, almost half a year. Do we really want to be doing that on these important issues? And I accept that the working party is subservient to the scrutiny panel. And that's why I thought it was important to bring it back to the scrutiny panel to decide how it wants to deal with this important issue and give the authority where necessary. It would still be acting by and with the authority, if this is what we do, of the internal scrutiny panel. So I'd be prepared to move what Philip has suggested, that it is dealt with by delegated officer decision in consultation with all of the members of internal overview and scrutiny. If there is any single dissent, then yes, it would be appropriate to bring it back to internal. I would hope, if that was necessary, Chair, you could convene an extraordinary one, but that takes time again. But this is about trying to meet the needs of our residents in the lawful way and reducing unnecessary delays, which could take up to half a year to get something in place. Car sales, for example, Chair, as I outlined at the at the working party, they start really in April, May, June, July and becoming a real nuisance to residents. And if it is something we can address, we should address it as quickly as we possibly can. This isn't something new, Chair. Myself and Councillor Guttridge have been banging on Phil's door for years, and he's probably got a bank of photos to prove it about all the car sales. So I'm happy to move formally endorse Phil Richardson's proposal and move it for the panel, Chair.
Happy to second that, Chair.
Okay, Councillor Brown. There's to be fair, I don't have a particular problem with that either. Is that we've got to try and get these things up and running as quickly as possible. There's Councillor Phillips, you've got your hand up.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I tend to agree, especially with the car sales problems that Mr. Richardson has probably had photos from me and numerous complaints from residents, etc., on the highways as an example. I have got no problem with resolving these issues that are affecting residents as quickly as we possibly can. If it goes working party, delegated officer, checks and balance with the overriding umbrella panel, clear that, send it off, get it done. Thank you, Chair.
I would be remiss of me, but Councillor Sargent, you're actually the chair of the working party. Does the solution that's been suggested, does that particularly go in your favour, or?
Yeah, it's in. I think that's a good way forward, because these things are important, and if we can bring them forward quicker, then it's going to benefit everybody in the borough, isn't it? So, yeah, I'm for that.
Okay, there's Councillor Tandy.
Yes, Chair. Could I ask if Councillor Wilson would be prepared to add to his proposal that this be used simply for the issue of the PSP, this system be used simply for the processing of the PSPOs?
Happy to include that.
Yes, I think that would have a general welcome across the panel, because I think that was the whole idea, was to try and get these things up and running and stop them, or picking up the points is when they've run out of time, we can pick them up and actually run with them before the order is no longer in action. I heard Councillor Wilson said he has no particular problem with that. Has anybody else got any particular problems with that, with the suggestions that have been made? I see no dissent or anything else. So could we formally propose that we actually do what has been suggested, and it should enable us to get the next two, and I don't think there is a great deal of PSOs knocking about at the present moment, but at least get these two up and running with Andy's with Andy's timelines as chair of the working party, and then if he can call us together, and then we can report back to the main committee through email or whatever, and then take it through the process of what Mr. Richardson was thinking. Is that okay with everybody?
Yeah.
Councillor Tandy, you've got your hand up again.
Sorry, Chair, only on the basis that this is not setting a precedent.
A precedent, yes.
The PSPOs that we are talking about here.
Yeah. I specifically said the PSOs, councillor, so that would be for the PSOs. So everybody in favour of that? Yeah, I'm pleased that there's been quite a few things that everybody's been agreed on tonight. It must be the new year or something. I don't know. But anyway, I haven't got any other matters arising of any particular kind. I would like to thank you all for your attendance tonight. I think there's been some good debates and some sensitive debates of what's happening just now and possible ways forward. So I'd like to thank everybody for their attendance and everybody for their participation, and wish you all a good night. And Victoria, could you switch off the live stream, please?